Amazon Prime's Rings of Power can best be described as a $1 billion set of postcards with some pretty pictures. The only problem is when you turn them over, when you flip them to see the message, staring right back at you is a giant middle finger to J.R.R. Tolkien and the fans. Episode 3 is no different. The finger's the same, just bigger. Welcome, Slayer Nation. I hope all of you are having a magnificent day, my friends. Rings of Power is both slow and fast in all the wrong places. It's kind of like watching paint dry while rabbits hum. But in this episode, Prime pulled out all the stops. They give us a magnificent display of shots of Numenor. But Galadriel's adventures in the Island Kingdom are downright embarrassing. Then Amazon even tried to burn our eyes out of our sockets with this slow motion sequence of Mary Sue smiling while riding a galloping steed. I'm really surprised no one called PETA. So it's time to stop the cringe. It's time to expand the fellowship. Become a part of it. Push the subscribe button down below and help us grow our voices till they're heard across the world. Now, because Rings of Recycled Fantasy is just a collection of shake and bake storylines and dime store dialogue, which actually lead to nowhere except creating false drama, which always revolves around everyone arguing and Galadriel arguing with everyone, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to pull key scenes that we're going to highlight and then some butchered lore. So as Elendil's ship arrives, ferrying Galadriel and Halbrand into Numenor, we see this colossal statue of Eärendil. Now, Eärendil was the father of Elrond and his twin brother Elros, who chose to live a mortal life, and he was the founder and the first king of Numenor as Tar Miniatar. But in the War of Wrath, which Prime did a great disservice to Tolkien and what they showed, Eärendil fought against Morgoth's dragons. Later, he sailed his ship across the skies carrying a star. It would be the light of that very star that in the Third Age, Galadriel would give to Frodo.
Farewell, Frodo Baggins. I give you the light of Eärendil, our most beloved star.
And Tolkien's Atlantis-style kingdom of Numenor comes to life. And it's probably the best thing that Prime has done so far. You can see the Greek colors of blue are washed everywhere in people's clothing, except the wardrobe actually isn't really done well. It looks like it came from the Wheel of Time, but the colors are vibrant. And it's all across all the towering structures. It is the only thing that Amazon Prime has done well so far. And it's the only thing that's good in this episode. Prime finally proved that they actually spent some money on the series instead of shoving it into the pockets of their 21-plus producers. Except creating shiny spectacle can't save a story. You need strong plot and likable, strong characters. Otherwise, all that glitters isn't gold. So the key sequences, the key scenes in the first 35 minutes of the Numenorian plotline, you have Galadriel and Halbrand arriving at the Numenorian court, where Galadriel starts spouting off her long list of titles before defaulting to her kickball Karen mode and sassing the royal queen regent, demanding a ship to return to Middle-earth. Well, the Queen Regent Tarmiriel I of My Balls Are Bigger Than Yours elf tells her to pound sand. Halbrand tries to defuse the situation as the week's meat suit MacGuffin. And then Karen breaks through out of her quarters. She escapes trying to find a ship when she bumps into Elendil and almost stabs him to death with her favorite dagger, turning a wannabe Tolkien series nearly into a Tarantino bloodfest.
I'm afraid the Queen has charged me with seeing to it that you cause no further disturbance.
Suppose the words never managed to escape your throat.
Supposing they did.
So Eärendil soothes her temper tantrum and talks to the spoiled elf like she's a child, distracts her with a quick adventure. And that's when we have it. Amazon Prime breaks every article of torture from the Geneva Convention, giving us this agonizingly painful slow-motion scene of Galadriel smiling, riding a horse like she's in a Lifetime movie of the week. Well, in quick order, Halbrand tries to find a job. He then gets into a brawl and is jailed for stealing. Galadriel, at the Elven Library, finally uncovers the mystery of that mark. It was merely a map of the Southlands. In between all that, we meet Iharion, who is the sister of Isildur just as he's finishing his last day of training. As a cadet, he starts repeating the chant of his sea captain, "The sea is always right." And now we have proof. Too many people at Amazon Prime watch too much Mandalorian. They wanted their own coda of This Is the Way.
The sea is always right.
The sea is always right.
And you know what I thought of when I was watching Galadriel in this episode is how many ways can the Bobbsey twins of Payne and McKay butcher her? How many ways can they desecrate and pervert this character? Galadriel was never a Numenor in the books, never once in her life. She wasn't this elven steamroller that bullied over people. And she would never allow anyone to lock her in a royal room as either their guest or as a prisoner. She studied under Melian the Maiar, one of the greatest Maiars of Middle-earth. She could have, without ring or without a ring, dropped the entire palace of Numenor. But it just shows us that someone at Amazon Prime has mistaken bravery, courage, and strength with being an arrogant, unlikable jackass.
Get off me! Lose your footing again, Galadriel.
Remove your hand from me, sir. I have pursued this foe since before the first sunrise bloodied the sky. Even to speak the names of those they've taken from me. There is a tempest in me.
And Payne and McKay are butchering legendary characters from the books, transitioning them into sideshow attractions just so they can service a Hollywood message. For example, in the canon, the Rings of Power were forged 1,600 years before the births of Tarmiriel, Ar-Pharazôn, Elendil, Isildur, and Eärien. She doesn't exist. She wasn't Elendil's daughter. She's Prime's creation, and another disservice to the professor. So we're going to break down some of the Lorelei. So Lorelei 1015. Amazon Prime butchered the tragic story of Tarmiriel. They turned her into a queen regent just so they could have another powerful woman that all men bow down to. It's like, go, girl power posse. But in the canon, Tarmiriel would have been the fourth queen of Numenor until her first cousin Ar-Pharazôn forced her into marriage, raped her. Then he took her crown, usurped her throne, and salted the wounds by robbing her of her identity, renaming her Ar-Zimrafel. Think about that. Tarmiriel was the last person who could have turned the tide, avoiding Numenor's destruction from everything Ar-Pharazôn and Sauron had done in the canon. See, they had seduced the citizenry away from following Eru, the Valar, and the Elves into worshiping the Dark Lord Morgoth. They said, build him a great temple, bring human sacrifice offerings to him from the ranks of the faithful, those who still followed the Eldar. And if you do so, that thing you fear the most, death, it won't happen to you. One day you will achieve the same immortality from us as the elves. That is what caused the destruction of Numenor. And on its final day, Tarmiriel drowned under a great wave as she was climbing the holy mountain of Meneltarma. Think about all the characters that they've destroyed. Then you have Ar-Pharazôn. Ar-Pharazôn, who was the Golden. He's an evil little bastard. But here in the show, the way they show him, think about it. He's mocking Galadriel's demands about being returned to Middle-earth, saying we haven't done that for an elfin generation. Lie. Numenorians had been traveling to Middle-earth since 600 of the Second Age. They had been establishing colonies and ports up and down the shoreline. And this whole elven hatred from the citizens of Numenor, it didn't exist before the rings were forged. And they're not forged yet in the series. The elves from Tol Eressëa, a small island outside of Aman, the Undinelings, would often visit Numenor, bringing gifts. High King Gil-galad would work with a number of their kings. This loathing didn't happen until 2200 of the Second Age under King Tar al-Kaliman. It's just interesting. These showrunners destroyed all these characters. You have, again, you're talking about Tarmiriel. Not only did they undo the entire legacy of the way Tolkien wrote her, they then decided to miscast the role. She was written by Tolkien to be fairer than ivory, silver, or pearls. And then they introduced us to this Numenorian multiracial cast. I'm like, okay. Numenorians in the canon were descended from the first house of men of the Edain, and the Edain were gifted both long life and the island kingdom from the Valar for fighting Morgoth in the First Age. This has nothing to do about race. And if you're going to say, well, hey, a lot of people from around the world could have gotten on a ship and migrated it. No, they couldn't. This has to do with the size of the world. No one from Tolkien's Harad, which is Africa, or no one from his Rune, which is Asia, could have made it there. But the showrunners treat this series and this episode as if it were a pub crawl. They drink everything in sight, and the next day, whatever they remember, they throw up and slap it in. You got storylines which are out of sync, and characters are pulled out of their plot lines, gorilla glued together with fragments of pieces that make no sense. Then in the last highlights from the final 20 minutes of the Numenorian plotline, we have Elendil chewing out his son Isildur for not wanting to finish his training as a Navy cadet before he reads out some cringy lines, almost like from The Last Jedi. The past is dead. We either move forward or die with it.
Let the past die. Kill it if you have to.
The past is dead. We either move forward or we die with it.
They're the same picture.
He then congratulates his daughter Earion, again, who doesn't exist in the books, because she just got accepted to a builder's college. What the hell does that have to do with a fantasy series? Put Tolkien aside for a second. College. That's just another social justice message. But you know what's worse than the butchering of Tarmiriel and Galadriel in this episode? It's actually Elendil. See, Elendil wasn't a widower, how Rings is showing him. He had a wife in the canon. She was unnamed. He had 2 sons, Isildur and Anarion. No daughter, Earion. But what's worse is that Amazon robbed him of his nobility. They made him a lowly sea captain. See, in the canon, Elendil was a lord of Anduin. He was a direct descendant of Elros. He could have been king himself. In The Lord of the Rings, Elendil is one of the most pivotal characters. He and his sons founded the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor, and the Bobbsey twins turned him into a piss boy. Well, now that that's done, we're going to go to the Middle-earth storylines. We're in the Southlands, which will eventually become Mordor. We see that Arondir is forced into an elven chain gang by the orcs so he can chop down trees, dig trenches, and tunnels. And the elven plotline here is a prime example of Amazon's gross incompetence as storytellers. Think about this. The producers and the writers, the showrunners, they're actually mocking their characters the same way they did in episode 1, where you had a company of elves could not beat a single ice troll. Here, Arondir is in a pit and he meets members of the Elven Watch who've been captured. The Watch, who are supposed to watch for orcs, supposed to watch for darkness, didn't see with their elven sight, which could see for miles, that in their backyard had been butchered, deforested, cut down, and burned by orcs. What's more interesting is the fact that you have Peter Jackson 20 years ago gave us a more diverse casting of orcs than ever before. They came in colors from peach to greenish and brown and black and white. And here you have Arondir and his elven company are slaving away under the whips of their white orc masters. You think Amazon is trying to send us a message? It's repulsive. Then you get this old elf, which is kind of an oxymoron in a way, because yes, elves are old, but they don't look old. Prime just happened to hire an old actor. He recites another cringe line: "We shall sweep them away like salt from the table." And that's exactly what I think when I think of someone about to do a heroic action: food spices. And people thought that the one-liners from 80 actions flicks were bad. Well, we've proved them wrong. Anyway, so the company of elves decide we got to break out of here. At least one of us go to the Watch and bring back reinforcements. Well, that doesn't work. They end up fighting a warg. And I'm not talking a warg from Peter Jackson's universe. No. We're talking a warg which came out of some dumpster dive from a local community theater company. It's horrible. Meanwhile, we catch up with the Harfoots right in the middle of their migration celebration, which they copied directly from the Irish Wren Day Festival. Amazon can create nothing original. Whatever they do is a total mess, and whatever they copy is butchered and bastardized. But what's different here is we discover some more truth about this little tribe. These aren't the hobbits that we love and admire in the Shire. No. See, Nori and her family are concerned that they'll be left behind because their pawpaw in the other episode, remember, he twisted his ankle. And you're like, well, what does that have to do with it? Well, you see, the Harfoots are chanting, "No one goes off trail, no one walks alone." Yep, but they don't practice what they preach. This little cutthroat crew of bastards, they will leave your ass behind if something happens to you. If you need help, nope, you're on your own. And at that night of celebration, you have Lenny Henry's homeless hobo Harfoot. He decides to read a list. It's like a ceremony of all the names that they remember of those who are no longer with him. You're like, wait a minute. Aren't these supposed to be a loving troop, a loving village? No. I don't remember the names that they read off. It's like, "Scrotum, we remember your name when you rolled down the hill and none of us came after you." These characters are being made a mockery of. I don't know what Payne and McCain's problem is with the Irish, but they've turned the Harfoots into a caricature of the Irish. They have them dressed in raggedy, dirty clothes with twigs and hay and nuts in their hair, giving them these bad parody stage Irish accents. It's reprehensible. What we do discover is that the stranger is finally noticed because he blunders around. And Lenny Henry, in a moment of mercy, is like trying to appease the mob of Harfoots. They're all sitting there going, hey, we got to get rid of these people. This family is horrible. Look what they brought to us, this giant who's going to destroy us. He shows mercy, saying, this girl, Nori, is just a child. And in the same breath, he's like, but their family will go to the back of the bus, period, which is almost certain death, especially if you're injured. So the stranger bucks up and he pushes the cart and becomes part of that family circle. And that's when I realized about this series and about this episode. All the money in the world cannot save bad writing. All the grand spectacle cannot paper over unlikable characters and bad plot. The show is dying even as a generic fantasy series because there's no grand sense of adventure. Rings of Recycled Fantasy is tearing itself apart at the seams because it has not been true to Tolkien. It is one big lie.
That is one big pile of shit.
And see, truth is a foundation that is required to stand on, being true to yourself, true to your heart, true to what you believe and what you love. So get out there, lead by example, and let them hear you roar. We never bow down, we never bend the knee. Firmly define, step up, stand tall, and get busy living your best life now, always forward.
Whoops.